taken in the light that quickened eye and leaf. May my brain be bright with praise of what I eat. In the brief blaze of motion and of thought, may I be worthy of my meat. Good morning. That was Prayer After Eating by Wendell Berry. And this is our call to worship for today. I'm Nate Hope. I'm a member of the speaking team at Windsor Mennonite Fellowship, and I'm glad that you tuned in to join us. If you're following the Christian calendar, today is the last Sunday in Ordinary Time. Advent begins next week, leading into Christmas, but I thought why not start the Christmas season a little earlier this year. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was preparing a sermon on fasting, but I was a little derailed by the stresses brought on by COVID-19. That's okay, because it ended up providing some space for further digesting of the topic. Fasting is most commonly practiced during Lent, but many Christians practice fasting during Advent as well. Out of curiosity, have you ever fasted from anything before? I get the sense that it's not a common practice in Anabaptist circles. And I think I understand why this is. It goes back to the Lenten season of 1522 and what's called the Affair of the Sausage. I don't know about you, but I find that title hilarious. I don't know where it came from. But as the tradition goes, Jörg Zwingli, a pastor in Zurich, Switzerland, was publishing a collection of his sermons on the epistles of Paul. And his printer, Christopher Froischer, had his staff working overtime to get the pages out. When they finished, the men were all hungry. So Christopher invited them, along with Zwingli and various other churchmen, to have some sausage. The problem was that at that time, it was illegal to eat meat during Lent. And at that time in history, fasting was very strict. It was more akin to the Ramadan fast of Muslims. Actually, it was more strict. Muslims can break fast at night, but Christians could only eat boiled, bland vegetables and bread in the evening. Though he himself did not eat the sausage, Zwingli was quick to defend Christopher from allegations of heresy. In a sermon, Zwingli argued that fasting should be voluntary, not mandatory. The motive for fasting at the time was coercive and shallow. It was reminiscent of the fasting of the Israelites, and God was calling out for a better fast. That fast that God desired was to care for the poor, the widow, and the orphan, the vulnerable in society. Fasting was to be subject to individual rule rather than collectively as the discipline of fasting, which was upheld by the Catholic Church at that time. So it's plausible to me that Anabaptists coming along a few years later would have inherited this viewpoint from Zwingli. And this is a good reminder for us to check our motivation for fasting. Now we come 500 years later, and we no longer live in a country with a state church, and fasting isn't forced on any of us. So why would we fast at all? I fasted this past Lent, and I'm planning on fasting again during this Advent. Later on, I'll share a little bit more about my experience. I didn't grow up with the tradition of fasting around the Christian calendar, although I was aware of the practice and discipline of fasting. I remember my dad occasionally fasting for a specific reason, to grow closer to God or for healing of some kind. At least that's how I understood it at that time. Although not limited to it, fasting can simply be understood as abstinence from food or drink for a period of time. Fasting has recently come into popularity again through fad dieting. There's intermittent fasting and periodic fasting for health reasons, but as Christians, our understanding of fasting is different. Scott McKnight describes fasting this way: fasting is a response to a grievous sacred moment in life. When confronted with a sacred moment, we fast. And after fasting, we experience results of some kind. Many times this leads people to thinking fasting produces results. This is an instrumental view of fasting. When we focus on results, fasting becomes manipulative. It seems the understanding for many Christians is that fasting produces results, but the main focus of fasting is reflection on the sacred moment. Scott McKnight calls this the responsive view of fasting. Being moved by a sacred moment, we find ourselves fasting. And because we are aware of God's movement in the world, we may discover desired results. The Christian discipline of fasting isn't just about abstaining from food, but the understanding that we are more than our bodies. In this way, fasting is non-dualistic. It recognizes the connections between our body and soul, the material and spiritual. It's the bodily response to a spiritual experience. Christians understand fasting as has a spiritual element that strengthens our relationship with God, ourselves, and others. When we fast, we discover ourselves as we are. We are better able to align ourselves with God and empathize with our neighbors. I find fasting really hard, but I think that might be connected to my amazing ability to distract myself. I can find a million ways to avoid what needs to be done. In fasting, I empty myself of something, of anything. But by emptying ourselves, we are shown the truth of ourselves. It lies us naked and strips us of our excess and creates a space for transformation. Transformation leads us to a quenching of our thirst to wholeness. Fasting reveals to us who we really are. Motivated by the desire to examine ourselves before God, to get in touch with the spiritual reality of who we are. In this way, fasting is like Sabbath. With the Sabbath, we etch out time away from work and toil to create space. Sabbath could be understood as a kind of fast. Sabbath is a sacred moment where we remember that God rested after his creation. During Lent, we fast while meditating on the sacred moment of Christ's journey to the cross. And during Advent, we fast while experiencing the sacred moment of waiting for Christ to come. The Advent theme of waiting complements fasting well. The first time I tried fasting, I spent much of my time thinking about when my fast would end. Fasting uncovers something that is discomforting and self-destructive patterns that we cling to. Nothing will be enough to satisfy the gnawing sensation inside us to consume. This consumerism, you could say. In this way, fasting counteracts consumption. It's a radical act of abstinence from food. Fasting can make us aware of our dependency, where our real dependency is on God. We become aware of our complicity in a system to consume. As Marilyn Chandler McIntyre puts it, in a world of more, fasting says enough. Humbled to the range of our capacities and aware of our desires, we gain a clearer understanding of who we are. We're aware of our dependencies. We discover that we fasted from what does not genuinely feed us. We become empty enough to experience being filled and filled up. Fasting leads us to recognition of dependencies, forgiveness, and being welcomed back to fullness. This past Lent and through the upcoming Advent season, I'm choosing to fast from meat. Emily told me that this is a very traditional choice, but that wasn't my intention. I had no clue when I originally chose to do it. I decided to fast from meat for 3 main reasons. First, I wanted to fast from something that I would miss. And I couldn't really fast from my phone. Not that I'm opposed to that, but my work needed it. But I would miss meat. I crave meat. Second, it was because I recognized the harm that the meat industry can have on our environment. And third, because meat is a privilege. Many people throughout the world can't afford or don't have access to meat, especially what we call red meat. I learned this while I was reading through the More for Less cookbook. So I thought maybe fasting from meat would be a good thing. It was my act of justice and solidarity, and something that I would genuinely miss. I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian. I'm probably more of a carnivore. I was also probably bordering on a meat addiction. I thought that I couldn't go a day without having a meal with meat. I had the fear that if I didn't have meat, I would be too weak at work, or after the pandemic set in, the thought crossed my mind that maybe I would be weakening my immune system. There are legitimate reasons why someone may not be able to fast, such as diabetes or some other health condition. But I couldn't claim any of those reasons, and I was wrong in thinking that it would lead negatively. I was wrong in thinking that I would be negatively affected. In some ways, my Lenten fast was more and less difficult than expected. The first few days were easy, but by the 3rd day, my cravings started to get more intense. I had to change my cooking habits, and I realized how much I was relying on convenience. I had to slow down when cooking, which reminded me of my need to slow down and connect with God. Along with meditating on the horrors of the crucifixion, I was also better able to more objectively view the violence inherent with eating meat. This is something I'm still fleshing out, along with my conviction that God is nonviolent. As time went on, the fast got easier, and I enjoyed the experience. On Sundays, I could break fast, but there were Sundays when, near the end of Lent, when I didn't even want meat. my fasting experience showed me that another way of eating was possible. It was transformational for me. And I realized that I wasn't actually dependent on meat for subsistence. My fast increased my dependency on God. I could feast on the meat of the Word, and that's word with a capital W. I hope that my experience can be an inspiration for you to fast. If you're going to fast, what would motivate you to slow down? Have you ever been confronted by a moment in time that you were so moved that you had a physical reaction? Maybe this was a calling to fast for a period of time. Fasting may sound daunting, but many aspects of life are. Might I suggest that through fasting we discover hope of new life over fear of the daunting aspects of life? While fasting and waiting, the advent of Christ might become manifest in our lives. So as you go, may you be aware of God's Spirit moving in time and respond with your whole heart, whole soul, whole mind, and whole strength. Go in peace.